All right, let's dive into all things symbiotes and superhero movies, huh?
Mm.
Venom 3, Let There Be Carnage, sometimes called Venom, The Last Dance. We've got a pretty in-depth YouTube review, and we're going beyond just saying if it's good or bad.
Mhm.
You know, how does this movie fit into all the changes happening in superhero movies these days? Do you feel like things are changing? I mean, audiences seem to be a bit more picky now, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely shift happening.
Right.
I mean, we've had like decades of superhero movies now.
Yeah.
It's only natural that people's expectations would change, right?
Yeah.
What worked 10 years ago maybe doesn't work today.
Yeah, totally. And it seems like Venom 3 is coming out at a really interesting time. Before we get too deep into that, though, maybe we should do a quick recap of the movie for anyone who hasn't seen it yet.
Yeah, sure. The reviewer keeps it pretty simple. Eddie Brock and Venom are on the run. Basically, they're trying to stay out of the U.S. government, and the symbiote god, Null, he really wants to break free,
Yeah.
from his cosmic prison. And guess what? He needs Venom to do it, so he sends out some seriously creepy minions to get him.
Right, right. And this is where things get a little weird with the timeline. The movie says that all three Venom films happen in just 1 year, which, come on, it's kind of hard to believe when you see how much Tom Hardy has changed between movies.
Yeah, right. It makes you think, like, do those little continuity errors even matter to audiences anymore? Or are we all just willing to suspend our disbelief because it's a superhero movie?
Hmm. I think it's probably a bit of both, honestly. We all want a good story, but those inconsistencies can take you out of it sometimes. Speaking of the story, though, what does the reviewer think about Venom 3 overall? Did it live up to the hype?
Yeah, they seem to have a good time with it. They say it's fun, full of action, and basically what you'd expect if you liked the first two.
So if you were a fan of those, you'll probably enjoy this one too.
Yeah.
Okay, but the reviewer makes this argument that audiences want more from superhero movies now. It's not just about throwing some CGI action on the screen anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think has changed about superhero movies? I mean, have your expectations changed?
Oh, definitely. The bar is way higher now, that's for sure. I mean, think about some of the amazing superhero movies we've seen lately. Into the Spider-Verse, the Batman. Those were incredible.
That is great.
And when you have those huge successes and then some big flops too, I think audiences start to get more picky. They're looking for movies that are either visually amazing, really well written, or both.
I think you're right. And that leads us to what the reviewer calls Sony's Spider-Man problem,
Hmm.
right? So Sony owns the film rights to Spider-Man and all the characters connected to him, but they can't use all the Marvel heroes.
Hmm.
And that puts limits on what they can do with Venom. The reviewer mentions wishing they could see Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man interacting with Venom, which honestly, I'd love to see too. What do you think? Would that work?
Yeah, I mean, you can see why fans want that. It feels like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
It seems like Sony's trying to make their own little Spider-Man universe, but it feels kind of off without the main guy there. Maybe those Spider-Man villain movies would be better as parts of actual Spider-Man movies instead of trying to be their own thing.
Right. It's like they're trying to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with only jelly. You need both parts. But then the question is, would Sony ever work with Marvel Studios to let Venom be in the MCU? And would fans even want that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's the big question. On the one hand, a Venom movie set in the MCU with all those characters and storylines we already know could be huge. Just imagine all the Avengers suddenly with Venom powers. Talk about high stakes.
Yeah. Now that's a movie I would definitely watch.
Mhm.
But let's get back to Venom 3 for a second. What are some of the good and bad things the reviewer points out?
Well, one thing they were surprised by was this scene between Venom and a character played by Rhys Ifans. Don't get too excited, though. It's not the lizard. But this scene was good because it shows how Eddie and Venom act around someone who isn't usually part of their dynamic.
Okay, that's interesting. So not everything in the movie was great then. What did the reviewer think was less successful?
Yeah, they thought a lot of the movie was kind of predictable, especially compared to some of the more creative superhero movies out there. And they said that while the third act is good, it's not super epic and amazing like some people might be hoping for.
So it sounds like there's a lot to talk about, right? We've got a fun but maybe predictable Venom movie, audiences wanting more from superhero films, and then this whole Sony Spider-Man problem on top of it all. So how does all this connect to the bigger world of Venom stories? And what could it mean for the future of superhero movies? That's what we're going to get into next.
It's interesting when you compare this movie to some of those big Venom stories from the comics, like Absolute Carnage and King in Black. I mean, those stories have so many more Marvel characters and symbiotes everywhere. It makes you realize how limited a Venom movie feels when it's on its own, especially outside the MCU. Do you think we could ever see something that big in a Venom film?
Hmm, that's a tough one. Those comic book stories are so huge, you know? It would be really hard to put them on the big screen. But I think you make a good point about how the MCU has changed everything when it comes to how big these stories can be.
Mm.
They've shown that people want those interconnected stories that go across multiple movies.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think, could Venom ever be as awesome as he could be without being part of that bigger picture? What if Venom was in the MCU? What kind of trouble do you think he'd cause with the Avengers? Or even better, fighting against them?
Wow, that's an interesting thought. Can you picture Venom going up against the Hulk? Or maybe some kind of mind battle with Scarlet Witch? There are so many possibilities.
Right. And the reviewer brings up something interesting. They say that Venom 3 and even Deadpool 3 seem to be wrapping up their stories. They think this might be a sign that superhero movies are heading for a kind of reset.
Hmm, that's a really cool idea. It does feel like we're getting too many superhero movies now. Do you think audiences are getting tired of them?
Maybe. I think people want more stories that focus on the characters instead of just building these big worlds and having everyone cross over all the time. Remember that scene the reviewer liked, the one with three ice fans? It was good because it was a moment of real connection in all the action and craziness.
Yeah, I love those kinds of moments. It's like finding something special hidden away. It reminds you why you like these characters in the first place.
Right, and it shows how important those anchor characters are. The big ones like Spider-Man, Batman, Wolverine. They're like the foundation of everything. Without them, the other stories can feel lost.
Yeah, it's like those anchor characters keep everything grounded. Right. Which brings us back to Sony's problem, right? If those villain movies aren't working so well and people want those big, iconic characters, what does that mean for Venom in the movies?
Well, it shows you how hard it is to build a whole universe around characters who are usually the bad guys. Villains are usually defined by how they go up against the hero.
So if there's no hero to fight, do they lose some of their purpose in the story? I mean, think
Right.
about it. Those Spider-Man villains are so famous because of how they interact with Spider-Man.
Hmm.
Take that away, and maybe they're not so interesting anymore.
It's a tricky thing, and it seems like Sony is trying to figure it out. They want to make money from these characters, but they also have to find a way to make them interesting on their own.
So what do? Do they keep trying to make their own separate universe? Or do they try to work with Marvel Studios to put Venom in the MCU? Or maybe there's another option we haven't even thought of.
I don't know. That's what makes these deep dives so fun. They make you think bigger beyond just the one movie. It's like we're putting a puzzle together, trying to see how it all fits.
And sometimes the coolest things happen when you realize there are pieces missing, or pieces that don't fit the way you thought they would. Speaking of missing pieces, did the reviewer say anything about a post-credit scene in Venom 3? Without spoiling anything.
Oh, yeah, they did. They really want people to check out their spoiler discussion if they want all the details. But they said it definitely sets things up for the future, which could be really interesting after everything we've talked about with Sony and what they could do with the character.
Okay, cool. So we've covered a lot, right? We talked about what happens in Venom 3, what the reviewer thought, how superhero movies are changing, and all the problems Sony has with these Spider-Man characters. It feels like we're at a turning point for superhero movies, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. The old ways aren't working anymore. Audiences want different things, and it's getting harder to tell who's the hero and who's the villain. It's a really cool time to be into these stories, and it's impossible to know what's going to happen next.
Okay, well, before we try to predict the future, let's do a quick recap of the main points from this deep dive.
Hmm.
We started by talking about how Venom 3 fits into this, changing world of superhero movies.
Mm.
And it seems like there's a lot going on. Interconnected universes, standalone stories, reboots, all this stuff. It's almost too much. What do you think makes a superhero movie stand out now? I mean, with so many out there.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't think it's easy to answer. But I think what we've been talking about gives us some clues, right? First, you need strong characters. Whether it's a hero, villain, or someone in between, the audience has to connect with them, emotionally. Think about how much people care about Spider-Man, Batman, Wolverine. Those characters work because they're complex, they've got flaws, they're relatable.
Right, it's not just about powers and costumes. It's about that human stuff, the struggles, the victories, what makes them feel real.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to the second thing. A story that grabs you. Even with great characters, if the story's no good, the movie won't work. And these days, with superhero movies everywhere, a good story has to be more than just the origin story or saving the world. Audiences want something new, something surprising, something that makes them think.
Like that scene in Venom 3 with Recipients, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like the reviewer liked it because it was unexpected, and it gave us some real character development. It wasn't just Venom smashing stuff up.
Yeah, exactly. Those moments where you get to see the character, that's what makes a superhero movie better. And then there's the third thing, how well it's made. You can have great characters and a great story, but if the movie's not good, it doesn't matter. This means everything. The directing, acting, the special effects, the music. It all has to work together to really pull you in.
Yeah, think about some of the best superhero movies we've seen lately. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, the Batman, Guardians of the Galaxy, they all had those things. Great characters, great stories, and they were really well made.
But they all stood out, right? They were unique and they connected with people on a deeper level. And I think that's what Sony needs to do with their Spider-Man universe.
Yeah, it's hard, but I don't think it's impossible.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe Venom 3, even with the things that weren't so great, is a step in the right direction. Maybe it's setting things up for something really amazing in the future.
Well, the reviewer definitely made it seem like there's more to come, especially with that post-credit scene. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what Sony does with Venom and all those other Spider-Man characters.
Yeah, we'll see. As much as I love talking about what might happen with superhero movies, I think it's time to wrap this up.
Hmm.
We covered a lot, from the plot of Venom 3 to how superhero movies are changing. We talked about the problems Sony has, why strong characters and good stories are important, and how everything has to be well made.
Yeah, and most importantly, we got to talk about all this with you, our listener, because at the end of the day, the future of these movies is up to the audience. It's your passion, what you expect, and how much you care about these stories that will decide what happens next with superhero cinema.
That's a good point. So as you go back to your life with all this new stuff to think about, remember to keep thinking critically. Ask questions, challenge what people tell you, and don't be afraid to say what you think. Because in the world of superhero movies, where things are always changing, your voice is the one that matters most.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.